Welcome everyone to this another episode of Unlearning the Falsehoods. I guess we are in the mm, 24th episode of this series, and so far we have not reached the time of transfer of power, that is 1947. The time scale that we have managed to scale so far is we have reached the partition of Bengal. Okay, so this set a political precedent for partition of a specific particular geography in this part of the subcontinent on religious lines for political benefits. Okay, now the entire move, the move that was taken by the British to partition Bengal, now there can be a considerable debate about did they do it for administrative convenience, or was it a political maneuver by the British to check the rising tide of nationalism or not. Now in this particular video, if you still have doubt that indeed British did the partition of Bengal just for the convenience of administration, if you still somewhere in the back of your head believe that, in this video we will we will clear all those doubts inside your head that it was the cunning nature of the British and and the Muslims, the Christians and the Muslims, the people of the book, to check the rising tide of pagan nationalism. Okay, so yes, we have seen this. All right. So right after the partition, on the very day of partition, there were riots, widespread riots. Temples were destroyed, desecrated. Idols were broken. Women were gang raped. This is in 1905. The same problem in Bengal and in the current day Bangladesh, or in the state of West Bengal of Bharat, has problem has compounded. And imagine the rate of compounding over a century. So today we are going to talk about how were the demands of the Congress, how had those evolved in the wake of partition of Bengal, in the wake of Swadeshi movement, and there were also some anti-partition protests as well. Okay. Now, the reason why this is important is you will see a clear distinction, and you to this very day you'll also see this clear distinction between the political factions. Although we like to, identify our political parties on the lines of Western classification of politics in the terms of left or right. Okay, but really what our political parties are divided on is continue with the colonial hangover or the colonial legacy, or there are other political parties who advocate some sort of an innovation, some sort of a change or departure from this continuance of colonial legacy. Okay, so the moderates, the so-called moderates, what were they demanding from the British post partition of Bengal? Okay, with spread of English education and with introduction of print media, there were some newspapers, some of them advocating the British side, others they were also advocating the civilizational standpoint, I would say. But there was also press gagging orders. The press were shut down in many of the, by many of the laws, and many of the British officers have also gagged down, come down hard upon the press as well. But that is beyond the scope of this video. Right now, we'll focus on the moderate demands. What did the moderate want? Moderates were like, okay, we don't want complete independence. All we want is more degree of reforms. We want self government, but within the British Empire. That tells you a lot about their mentality. Okay, so far they were not demanding complete independence or complete sovereignty. Okay, now you can ponder upon the reasons why exactly wasn't Congress demanding too many concessions from the British. Why wasn't exactly it demanding complete sovereignty? Now, a justification that usually comes from the Marxist historians about this is that they were scared that they might offend the British and it would unleash the wrath of the British upon the natives. I would say it was worth the risk, even if the wrath of the British would have been unleashed upon the natives. What was the worst that could have happened? It's not like they were in the majority at that time, but that is again discussion for some another video. That was what moderates were demanding, and that clearly shows their mentality, that clearly shows their mindset, that they were in a way, I would say, afraid to ask for more. Whereas if you come towards the extremist side, that is a misnomer really. They weren't really extremists, they were nationalists. Okay, they believed in this masculine form of nationality, the extremists. They were labeled extremist because they were taking extreme measures, or they were advocating extreme measures towards the empire. Okay, so even their own members within the congress, they were opposing them. So that tells you a lot. Okay, so on the one side they were extremists demanding complete and utter sovereignty for bharat, and there were other moderates who were demanding partial dominion status but within the british empire. Okay. Now we have discussed this in some of our previous videos. Like, whom did the British succeed when they came on the shores of Bharat and managed to develop their supremacy over here? Now, there is one side of the historians who would say that since post 1857, they chose Delhi and the Mughal emperor to be their symbolic head. So many of them would argue that it was indeed the Mughal power that the British managed to subdue. So they succeeded the Mughal power. But what these people don't understand is this is surface level history. When it was when the British had arrived, the Mughal Empire was way, in its downfall, in the later stages of its downfall. Okay, Aurangzeb, he died in 1707, and post Aurangzeb, there weren't any rulers who were worthy of being called rulers. I wouldn't say even Aurangzeb was a ruler, but again, let's not discuss that right now. What we're discussing is whom did the British succeed. I would very much argue, based on evidence, that it was the Maratha power that the Mughals, that the British succeeded. Okay, now this was the point of contention between the three parties. Okay, both the people of the book, that is the Christian colonizer and the Islamic colonizer, and the third one who was cornered by the first two parties, that was the pagan. Okay, they could not stand to see, they could not stand to witness that after centuries and centuries of subjugation and plundering, the pagan was finally on its finally had chosen to rise and take back what is rightfully theirs. So there was this mutual beneficial alliance that we have covered this sufficiently in the previous videos as well. Okay, so what this did was, right after 1905, okay, now this bolstered the courage of the Muslim community, that they had seen that after the partition of Bengal, with the eastern part of Bengal where they were in majority, and we have also established this, that there were widespread riots, there were temples who were destroyed, there were idols that were desecrated and whatnot. Okay, so they had tasted power, they knew what political organization can do for them. Okay, so right in 1906 was the time when British were going to introduce some constitutional reforms in Bharat. Okay, in the upcoming 3 or 4 years, that is in 1909, there were going to be some constitutional reforms. Okay, so right post 1905, the Muslims became conscious about political organization. They said that if we demand more, okay, we could establish power, because they, like I discussed earlier, they had contemplated this inside their head, that the pagan could not come to power after centuries and centuries of subjugation by both the colonizers. Okay, so yes, they were going to introduce some constitutional reforms, and so they planned a delegation. The Muslim community, they planned a delegation, a Shimla delegation in 1906. They wanted to consult the viceroy and they wanted to present their demands. Okay, because this was a very widespread knowledge that some constitutional reforms were going to come, and after the partition of Bengal, they had saw, okay, this is what political empowerment can do. Okay, now they could not stand to live under the rule of the pagan. This was against the rules of their book, and hence they tried to influence the British, in which up to a certain degree they were successful. Okay, so yes, now I'm going to read. Now there were two, there was also a similar deputation done by the Muslims back in 1882. Okay, it's not like they knew that in 1909 there were going to be some constitutional reforms and we are to present our demands. So, what did they do? In 1906, there was a similar deputation. So, close to 41 members, close to 41 converted Muslim natives of Bharat, they formed a committee and they went to the Lord, whichever Lord was in charge at that point, and they went to him for their prayers and their requests for their requests that could be accommodated in the upcoming 1909 constitutional reforms. Okay. Now, interestingly, there were also such demands made in 1882. Okay, in 1882, there was an individual who goes by the name of Amir Ali. He wrote an article. Okay, it's a very elaborate article. I'm not going to read the entire article because that is the beyond the scope of this video. I'm going to extract a few of the excerpts from that article. Don't worry, that would be a fully contextual article. Will not pick something out of random and cherry pick and then present to you as something that is sensational. No, that's not what I'm going to do. But he wrote an article, this individual fellow, Amir Ali. The name of that article was A Cry from the Indian Muslims. It was published in August 1882. Okay. Now, these are his words, not mine. The Muslims possess neither the wealth nor the education of the Hindus, and in consequence have generally failed to attract the attention of the authorities to their grievances. Okay. I propose in this paper to point out what are the requirements and legitimate expectations of the Muslims of India and to suggest in what way the benevolent intention of Her Majesty's government for the amelioration of this large class of her subjects may be carried out. That a homogeneous people like the Muslims of India, numbering 50 millions, and having a common language and religion should be discontented with the position they now occupy is a matter for serious consideration of the administrator of the Indian policy. So here Amir Ali is alluding to the fact that that the converted Muslims of the Bharat subcontinent, they do not have wealth nor they have education. Okay. So on what basis do they claim this superiority? You might have heard this in our political discourse. Many of the political leaders belonging to the Muslim community, they frequently allude to this fact that we have been the conquerors, we have been the rulers for so and so number of centuries. Okay, then why exactly has not your community developed? This is a Muslim person speaking in 1882. Okay, not even in 1900s or not even in 2000. So if a Muslim person in 1800s is saying that the converted Muslims are in terms of wealth or education, not at par with the pagan natives. So what exactly went wrong? Weren't you the rulers for close to like 4 or 5 centuries? Something for the gentry, the common working population of the Muslim class of Bharat that they need to ponder upon. Okay, majority of the wealth by the virtue of ruling class has accrued to the elites. Okay, not the commoner. Okay. Amir Ali further goes on and writes this in his article. The fact, however, remains that with every avenue to public employment already jealously blocked by an antagonistic and versatile race, it is almost impossible for a Muslim candidate to obtain a footing in any government office. Here he is crying foul about how the pagan natives, were very versatile in adopting the English education, and by virtue of them adopting English education rather quickly, they were able to gain uh, employment. So it is a common thought experiment. When British arrived at the shores, if you go by the narrative of the Marxist historians, that it is indeed that the Muslim conquerors were in the power and they were the one who had monopoly over wealth and power. So when British came over here, how is it that the pagan native managed? Okay, how is it that the pagan native managed to get positions of power in the employment of the British? Why wasn't exactly, uh, you know, Muslims forthcoming. Okay, this is again an appeal to the reason of the working class of Muslims in our country, not the elites who are gifted or who are privileged. Why exactly hasn't the wealth been distributed equally if you were conquerors for so and so number of centuries? Something for the Muslim community of Bharat to think about. Okay, this is a person writing in 1882, not even in 1900s, not even in 2000s. Okay, again, this is Amir Ali. In every walks of life, in every matter, whether it concerns the disposal of a post or dispensing of state hospitality, the Hindu has obtained an influence which he will not willingly share with another. So, even after centuries and centuries of subjugation, plundering, and everything else, if the Hindu is still able to, carve out a larger piece of pie for them, okay, he or she is still expected it to share with the Muslims who still claim that they have been a race of conquerors for so and so centuries. Do you see the flaw in this logic? All right, he goes on further to write this. This fellow, Amir Ali, he goes on to further and write this. This is still his words in this article, Cry of the Indian Muslims. It must not be forgotten, however, that a race of conquerors who not more than 100 years ago possessed a monopoly of power and wealth has not yet developed commercial and trading instincts. Half a century's degradation has deadened all spirits of enterprise among the Muslims, and absence of capital is another stumbling block in their path to commercial success. So, if you had a monopoly of power for centuries and monopolies over power and wealth over centuries and centuries, what exactly happened? Okay, why is it that only that your wealth is only concentrated amongst the you know top individuals? Why hasn't the wealth percolated downwards? Don't you have that, all those provisions of zakat and all the provisions of deen where you're supposed to only work for the community? Then why hasn't exactly your community developed? Again, I'm appealing to the reason of the working class Muslims. These are the questions that you should ask your politicians who claim to speak on behalf of your interests. Okay, this is a person speaking in 1882. Okay, not in 1900s or 2000s. I keep on repeating this because I know my words, some of the extracts of my video will be taken out of context and will be used to fuel hatred against me. But that is why I need to keep on repeating this. But yes, this was a person who was speaking in 1882. Now let's look at some of the statements that were given by the deputation of Muslims in the Shimla deputation of 1906. Okay, they went over there to present their requests to the whatever viceroy or lord was in charge at that moment, that if you are going to introduce some constitutional reforms, that is some representative element, that is meaning some sort of a democracy or direct election in the polity of Bharat in 1909. So they were acutely aware that if that was the case, due to their they do not have too many numbers in the population, so if there is election, they are bound to get the raw end of the deal. So they went over there, they presented a long list of requests. In essence, what they were requesting was that everything, if there is a direct election, it must have some reservation for the Muslims. Okay, separate reservation for the Muslims. Okay, so like I said, they had tasted blood, they had tasted authority. So after the partition of Bengal on religious lines, they had realized what they could extract out of British. Okay, so there was this mutual negotiations going on between both the people of the book. There definitely was some religious component to forge this alliance between both the monotheistic traditions. And if you still are hell-bent on thinking that no, British were just, and the demands that the delegation made in Shimla in 1906 were just, I think you are still living under the rock. So here are some extracts that I'm going to read out from the Shimla delegation in 1906. Okay. Still, it cannot be denied that we Mohammedans are a distinct community with additional interests of our own. Okay, they're clearly outlining this fact that we are different from the pagan natives of Bharat. Okay, and they have their own interests. Okay, where do their interests come from? The religious scriptures, okay, which are not shared by other communities, and these have hitherto suffered from the fact that they have not been adequately represented. Okay, so they think that if there is an element of direct democracy in Bharat, their interests will not be sufficiently represented, and hence they will need reservation everywhere. We venture to submit that the generality of the Mohammedans in all parts of India feel aggrieved that Mohammedan judges are not more frequently appointed to the high courts and chief courts of judicature. Here they are crying about the fact that majority of the judges of the Supreme Court are pagan, not exactly Supreme Court, but majority of the judges of the judicial bodies, they are pagan natives. Okay. So were the pagan natives nominated on those positions? No. They worked hard for it. They adopted their language, they adopted their knowledge systems, they mastered it, and hence they are in that position. You could not study it because there were certain leaders in your community who kept you away from that education, that forms of skill and that form of employment. You could not gain that position of power. Such is the case to this very day for that particular community in this country. You are deliberately being kept away from real knowledge, real skills in the name of religious politics by the political leaders of your community who claim to represent your interests. Again, appeal to the reason of the Muslim community. What exactly is going on? This is again from that same demands. We now also suggest that the senates and the syndicates of Indian universities might be similarly dealt with. That is to say, there should be, so far as possible, be an authoritative declaration of the proportion in which Mohammedans are entitled to be represented in their either body. So whatever, if there is a university, if there is a legislative body, if there is an executive body, there has to be some or the other Muslim representation in that body. So there is clear distinction between two different nations, that you cannot think about us because you do not belong to our faith. Okay, these are real life manifestations of two nation theory at play, because what they had seen in Bengal was that after the partition, since they were in majority, the British could not do anything. There were widespread riots, widespread crime going on, widespread destruction of temples. This is in the 1900s I'm talking about. Imagine how the problem would have compounded 1 century and 2 decades later. So yes, both the extracts, if you see the extracts from Amir Ali's article and extracts from the similar deputation in 1906, you'll see there is a continuity of thought. Okay, all right. Now, why exactly were the British playing along? That is something also someone might also ask. Okay, they are people of the book, but didn't they have their own other interests? They did. They did have their interests, but it was an alliance of, I would say, convenience between both the people of the book. Okay. If you remember in the earlier part of this video, and even some of the previous videos in this series, we have spoken about how the Congress was fragmented. Okay, there were moderates and there were the extremists. In essence, extremists were nationalists in the true sense. Okay, when I say nationalists, I do not speak about nationalism with the definition that the West has. Okay. Now, Congress, in a sense, it was established by a British civil servant. There are multiple theories out there, but Congress was established as an eyes and ears of the British into the sentiments of the gentry. Okay. So now the British and the moderates, okay, they wanted to control extremists. That much we have established, because if the extremists manage to gain dominance inside the Congress, then Congress would cease to be the eyes and ears of the British into the gentry or into the sentiments of the common public. Similarly, who else had or stood to lose out a lot if extremists gained dominance inside the Congress? The converted Muslims. Yes. Okay. So the colonial establishment, they needed moderates and the Muslims to keep extremists in check, and the Muslims needed moderates and the British to keep the extremists in check. So you clearly see who was the enemy over here. Where were all the concentrated efforts of all the other, all the other parties directed? The moderates and the British wanted to control the extremists. The Muslims and the British wanted to control the extremists. So what does this tell you? To this very day, our politics is also runs on a similar dynamic. Okay, if you speak about reviving your civilizational ethos, if you talk about popularizing, if you talk about your festivals, if you talk about your belief systems, okay, so the moderate and the West, okay, the moderates have taken on the mantle of liberals today. So the liberals in the West will try to push you down. Okay. Similarly, the entire Islamic lobby and the West will again try to push you down. So to this very day, such dynamic in the politics of Bharat continues. So what does this tell you about the entrenchment of coloniality? All right. So after all this, right after the partition of Bengal in 1906, okay, like I said, the Muslims, the converted Muslims of Bharat, they had tasted this success that such political organization and unity can give you, results. It can give you tangible results on ground, because they had managed to carve out a separate province for them that to this very day exists as a sovereign country in our neighborhood, an epicenter and a place of nurture for radical Islamist ideologies, that is Bangladesh. Okay. So after the partition of Bengal, they realized that just like Congress, we need a body, we need a political body that claims, okay, that claims to uphold the interests of the Muslims of this part of the subcontinent, and hence comes to the, or hence All India Muslim League has been established in 1906 in the month of December at a place called Dhaka. Now, the reason why it was established in Dhaka also has a separate story altogether, but that we will focus in some another video. But yes, the place Dhaka also plays a very large significance. Just to give you a brief insight into it, like we have covered in one of our previous videos, Pakistan was established because Islam needed some sort of a base camp in this subcontinent. Okay. Now that acted as a western frontier. Bangladesh was supposed to be an eastern frontier. Suffice to say, we will cover this topic sufficiently in the further videos. But yes, for right now, you can see right after the partition, All India Muslim League was established in Dhaka, and they had a charter. Okay, they had a charter right after founding. They put out a charter. Let me read out their objectives in that charter. In the very first line, they say to promote among the Muslims of India feelings of loyalty to the British, and to remove any misconception that may arise as to the intention of government with regard to any of its measures. This is a clear proof that there was forged an alliance of mutual benefits between both the people of the book to corner the pagan native. Okay. And on top of that, there was a section of population amongst the pagan natives who had allied with the British. Okay. And like I've discussed previously, both their efforts were pointed towards subduing the nationalist sentiments. So that tells you a lot. If there are people who are uniting and all their efforts are directed towards your defeat, what does that tell you? So yes, right after the establishment of All India Muslim League in Dhaka, there is a place close by to Dhaka, that is Komila. It is in the current day Bangladesh. There were widespread riots. Many numbers of the pagan natives were killed. Temples were destroyed. Women were raped. But we don't look at these facts. Our history textbooks conveniently delete these facts. These things indeed have happened. These things have, been very widely documented by people all across the world. It's readily available on the internet, but we choose to conveniently live under the rock, under the garb of a flimsy phenomenon that we like to call as secularism. All right. Now, like I said, there was an American journalist, Nevinson, who was traveling across the geography of Bharat and that particular areas of Bengal when these things were, going on. So this is what he writes. Okay. This is a following extract from American journalist Nevinson's book on the brazen partisan conduct of the English establishment. Okay, they conveniently chose to turn a blind eye towards the atrocities that were being perpetrated by the Muslims on the pagan natives. These are his words, not mine. And in the eastern Bengal, this national inclination is now encouraged by the government's open resolve to retain the Muslim support for the partition by any means in its power. It was against the Hindus only that all the petty persecution of the officialdom was directed. It was they who were excluded from government posts. It was Hindu schools from which government patronage was withdrawn. Okay? So, whenever I speak government in these words, government means the British. They stopped supplying funds to the Hindu schools. They stopped supplying, they fired everyone who was a pagan from their service. Okay. When the Muslims rioted, the punitive police ransacked Hindu homes and companies of little Gurkhas were quartered on Hindu populations. It was the Hindus in one place were forbidden to sit on the river bank. Of course, the plea was that only the Hindus were opposed to the government policy of dividing them from the rest of their race, so that they alone needed suppression. All right, this is an American journalist saying, not me. So clearly, the British had chosen their sides. This is in 1906. The British had chosen their sides. So if somebody says, no, even if you present literary evidence, you need to show exactly if there were repercussions on the ground. These were the repercussions. Okay, they stopped funding the schools. They fired all the pagan natives that were in service of the government. There were army that was established to stop the Hindus from taking, measures to protect themselves for self-defense. So clearly, the British had formed a mutual alliance of benefit, and both of them were the people of the book. So that also determines why exactly they were able to, and it comes as no surprise. The reforms that were introduced in 1909, okay, they introduced certain measures that were partial. Obviously, that's no surprise. Okay, but that is something that we will discuss in the next episode of this series of Unlearning the Falsehoods. If you haven't checked out our new series that we have started, that is Character Sketch, where we are going to look at certain individuals that have been villainized and vilified beyond the limit in our history just because there were some acts that they did in personal life. Okay, so we are going to do some character sketches of certain individuals. We have started with Vinayak Savarkar. The further characters that we have chosen, you'll see as and when we progress across the series. But that's all for this episode in the series of Unlearning the Falsehoods. Thank you for watching.